Hello and welcome back to Protect Life here at Breaking the Consensus. Today I am delighted to welcome Donal O'Sullivan from the Family Media Association. But before we get to talking to Donal, I first invite you just to notice the button there, the subscribe button, which will, if you click on that, any new information, any new content that we have created, you will be notified of it. Also, beside it there, you'll see there's a donate button. Anything you can give to help us out here will be greatly appreciated. Anyway, so first of all, I should explain, we've had some technical issues, which is the nature of the beast. Whatever the technology is, there are going to be technical issues. So it's primarily an audio experience for our listeners rather than viewers today, although they get to see me. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse. Anyway, Donal, thank you for joining us. So Donal, first of all, can you just explain a little bit about the Family Media Association, what it is you do and where people can find out about you?
Sure, thank you very much. It's Donal in on Brisha Shaw. You remember that was the old statement that RTE used to put out when they lost the picture. So something like that now. So Family and Media Association. Well, we started in the mid-90s. At that time, there was a perceived problem among a number of academics in UCD in particular about lack of fairness to the church-related issues, life issues in RTE. And I think these were actually raised by the bishops at the time with RTE. And I think RTE's answer tended to be, no, we don't see a problem. Nothing to see here.
Yes,
so it was exactly, yes. So it was thought that it would be a good idea for an organization like the Family Media Association to exist that would actually try to quantify the problem, to take it out of the realm of opinion and make it, a scientific or at least social scientific issue. So we had some very good academics involved, statisticians, with a good statistical ability, etc. So we were able to monitor programs and do fairly simple things, how much time was allocated to one side versus another. So we were able to graphically demonstrate that there was bias, and that was powerful in the early days. The name itself, Family Media Association, it's inspired by a World Communications Day message. Probably know that the popes put out a World Communications Day message each year, and in the mid-90s, Pope St. John Paul II put one out, and he proposed this idea that families might find it useful to join together, form associations to represent their interests in relation to media, advertisers, etc. So hence Family and Media Association. I think it's got a little bit more complicated since then. At the time, the idea was TV, and it was just RTE. It seems to be just RTE again now over the last few weeks, but things got very big and unwieldy, and it after a while also became no longer a simple matter of proving bias. Bias came in all sorts of different forms, so we needed to identify what they were. Michael.
So how do you, without going into too much technical detail, or if you want, if you can, but how do you go about looking at program production and quantifying bias? I mean, there's a quality element to it, but just what is it you look at when you're looking at that kind of thing?
Well, now in the early days, the way it was done, we had Michael Ahern was very involved, Christopher Farrelly, a few others, and they would have a dedicated team of monitors, right? And it wasn't all internet those days, so they would record directly, and these people would listen through the programs and just with a stopwatch, that sort of thing, assign times, duration to, say, a pro-life view getting aired, non-pro-life view. Also, if their panelist was was there one person who was in a pro-life side, maybe versus 3 who were against, that sort of thing. Now, I didn't come on board until about the end of 2005, and things had changed at that stage. The internet was coming in, and I had some some internet skills and also sort of background in psychology to some extent, and sort of dealing with the public. So it became a little bit more subtle that stage, but the early stuff was, there was far less to monitor, and people were going through it. I now would, for example, I would monitor myself directly, but I would also use internet tools to do that, and programs. I used to write programs in a former life, so I just use those skills and sort of get to it with a mixture of everything.
You said that it obviously once upon a time, at least in the Irish market, it was just RTE. Now we have many other non RTE sort media platforms, not just, I mean, I'm not talking just the internet, but also on terrestrial television, etc. But I suppose the difference is RTE, by its legal structure and by its funding, has particular kinds of responsibilities. As if we are, anybody who possesses a television has a legal responsibility under pain of jail time, indeed, if it comes to that, of paying their license fee, which goes to funding. And also, unlike say the BBC or the PBS in the United States, they also have they have the opportunity to raise money through advertising. So in a sense, while I'm asking, I suppose, the question, is it the consideration that the other stations are privately owned, and in a sense, within reason and within standards of decency and truth, they can do what they like, but RTE has a different kind of position?
Yes, I mean, the other stations are also subject to broadcasting codes. They can't just do what they like. But the present difficulty, shall we say, that RTE finds itself in is very much to do with its unique position. On the one hand, there's this commercial side where RTE are trying to raise as much money as possible. On the other hand, they are funded through the public funded essentially through the television license, and the clash between those two sides, I think, has caused a problem. I mean, on the one hand, RTE are required to maybe get the best presenters they can, best in the sense of those who will bring in advertisers, but on the other hand, they're constrained in a way that a totally commercial organization wouldn't be, because part of their money is coming from the license payers. And I think you could probably sort of palpable, really, that sort of double bind that they were in when looking for more money from the Oireachtas committees recently.
So let's get on to the reason, in a sense, why RTE is in so much in the news for the last little while. It starts off with the contract that Ryan Tubridy had with the Late, but it seems to have just expanded. And for those who haven't been following in great detail, or maybe have been like me, a little bit confused by the whole thing, can you give us a kind of a sense of what's going on? And you said that this is in a sense connected also to its particular finance, the way that its financing structure.
Okay, I could even take it back further in terms of what's going on. I would liken it, a couple of things have come to mind here. First of all, we have the dominant position of the church, 20, 30 years ago, whatever, and where if a priest made a moral statement, he was expected to live by those. Now, the church's position has weakened, and in ways it's been taken over by media commentators and those in the media who have been responsible in large part for weakening the position. But now they're being held up to similar standards. So somebody like Ryan Tubridy, on the face of it, he has a radio program. He had a television program, but if you were to sit down and just analyze the time spent making moral pronouncements, it would be very great, right? And you have, on the one hand, moral judgments being made, was on the other hand, it appears that he may have had information that he would have known the public would like to have had. You know, the public had information about his salary. He would presumably have known that to be incorrect, and yet that wasn't shared with the public. So public, as Brendan O'Connor said the other day, they may feel they've been made fools of, you know, and that's the big issue. If for example Ryan Tubridy did his program and never made any moral pronouncements, never said, oh, this is very bad, this is very good, then it would be easier to say, oh well, he kept that back, but he's not actually he's not the moral voice of the country. But in a way, the Irish media and, you know, high profile presenters have made themselves, or acting as the you know, the conscience of the nation, the moral voice, sometimes calling good evil and evil good.
They are the prophets of our day.
Yes, exactly. And now they're being held to account, ironically, because they have taken over so effectively from the true prophets, that there is this expectation from them to have some sort of consistency. So in one sense, they're being hoisted on their own petard, and that's certainly the way it strikes me. Another aspect to it is, of course, RTE over the years, recently at the moment, the real issues aren't being represented truthfully, proportionately, and so something like this, few 100,000, whatever, for Ryan Tubridy, at one level it might seem very big, but it's insignificant compared with the damage RTE has done morally, really. The way the country has been corrupted through the presentation of the life issue, family issues, etc. You know, that's pretty much what, you know, anything to do with faith and morals.
So do you think that this scandal has materially damaged RTE's position, or is it just going to be one of those passing things that they'll be back with the begging bowl? I mean, we know, for example, that there has been a lot of pressure from the RTE because,
you see, I think it. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to, for example, there's been pressure to change the modality through which the license is paid, that it should be done through revenue, and that way that everybody would have to pay it would be automatically noted who's because there are many, we're told, tens of thousands, if not more, people who simply don't pay the license, even if every year there are 100, I think it was 115 or something people prosecuted last year.
Yes,
the system is very random and ramshackle for identifying non-payers. So they want a system where they can guarantee that they're going to get all of their money. And in fact, there's also pressure to increase the licensing.
yes,
so
indeed. Yeah, I mean, RTE wants a broadcasting charge. Pat Rabbit wanted to bring in a broadcasting charge. You know, it's been something there that they've been looking at, but it's just so unpopular. And if you were to be very cynical, you might say, well, look, the brand RTE has been damaged to the extent that it's very difficult to bring in a broadcasting charge, and even more difficult now. So maybe time to change it. 20, 30 years ago, if RTE was in trouble like this, one would think, well, this is an opportunity to bring something in that is better. But unfortunately, at the moment, those who are in power are capable of bringing in something which is worse. Looking at the Oireachtas hearings, in ways, it looked a little bit like a sort of showcase implicitly for Marxism. You know,
also,
and against any commercial model, right? Sorry?
How, in what sense did you feel?
In what sense? A number of commercial practices were being criticized, right? Things which, okay, wouldn't be appropriate in the context of a state body or a semi-state body, but the impression was that these things were just very unusual in general. So, you know, if you're trying to get advertisers on board and you invite them to a function and you pay for things, you pay for tickets, whatever, you know, I defy you to look the commercial world in general and not see that happening. It's sort of like, this is the way business works. whereas people are up in arms partly because of things like that. And there's almost a sort of dishonesty at the heart of that. So is it capitalism that's in the dock? So in order to deal with something like that, okay, we take we'll take the commercial side out of it, and we'll have complete control over RTE from the state.
Do you think? I mean, I don't want to misconstrue what you're saying, but is there a sense, which is my sense of it, what it's worth, that in a way, an awful lot of the discussion that we're having is about people's salaries. Mm-hmm. He's on this, she's on that, and isn't that a lot of money, and isn't that terrible? And these commercial practices, which, like you say, are fairly standard practices in largish businesses, particularly businesses where marketing is a big thing, but that we're missing the bigger picture, that we're being distracted by the issue around money and the issue about the fact that it's being run in a sense as a business, commercial, that the real problem, the real issue with the nature of RTE is otherwise. But that
absolutely,
the public is being distracted by all this stuff because it's an attempt just to make people resentful, because there are some people are earning 45,000 and other people are earning 450,000, and somehow that's wrong, just wrong, that there should be people earning a lot of money.
No, absolutely. I mean, the real issue with our RTE is the issue of truth in the media. I remember I wrote an article that just came across it today, and it was for excuse me, we produced something called Media Report, and the article, the title is "RTE's biggest challenge is not about funding," and I have an image then of an identity lineup, who's responsible, and I'm saying really it's the truth is the biggest problem. Interest. I'll actually, if you don't mind, I'll read out just a little bit of this, because at the time Kevin Backhurst was head of news and current affairs, and as you know now, he's been brought in as Director General of RTE. He left for a while, he went to Ofcom, and he's back in. But I just started it like this. It has been announced that Kevin Backhurst, RTE's head of news and current affairs at the time, and the organisation's Deputy Director General, is leaving the station to work in Ofcom, the UK communications regulator. Mr. Backhurst was interviewed in RTE's News at 1, where he was asked to identify the broadcaster's, quote, biggest challenge going forward, unquote. The Deputy DG picked out, quote, funding, quote, as the biggest problem facing the organisation. Wrong. The biggest challenge now facing RTE, and in particular its news and current affairs wing, is RTE's own poor record in the pursuit of the truth, right? And in terms of holding RTE to account, the obvious ways is to make complaints to, it's now the Commission Naman. Hard to keep up. They keep sort of changing their names. But we had the IRTC, and then it became Broadcasting Commission of Ireland, and with also the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, then the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. And many are probably unaware, the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland actually ceased on the 15th of March this year, and it's been replaced by Commission Naman. But complaints have been upheld. We had a complaint upheld early on after the divorce referendum, but there are far more worthy complaints in our view that are not upheld and really should be. So there is this issue with misrepresenting family, faith and family issues, family and life issues, if you like.
I think it would be fair to say, wouldn't it, that RTE has a peculiar responsibility as the state broadcaster in that. For example, I believe the situation is the same in Ireland. I know I've certainly read, there's a lot of research which shows, for example, in the United Kingdom, when you look at people and how they consume news, how they watch the news, that when something very important happens at a global level or a national level, even people who traditionally would watch the news on ITV or on Channel 4 or some other platform, when something very important happens, they switch back to the BBC, because that's the locus of their trust, if you like.
Yes, absolutely.
And that the same ultimately must be or should be true of any national broadcaster. And RTE has level where people, if it's on the news on RTE, if it's on a program say, current affairs program RTE, that people
Mhm.
are more likely to bring with them a certain disposition of faith
Yes.
that they don't, say, to the commercial media, to the print media, whatever. And therefore, they do have a peculiar responsibility both to fairness and to accuracy.
Yes, there's still certain people who trust RTE. I suppose anyone really who was looking at the abortion debates coming up to the 28 referendum ought really not to be left in that position, but there are still people who trust RTE. It's interesting, the slogan, RTE's official, can't think of the word at the moment, slogan or motto, it used to be about growing the trust of the people of Ireland. And then they wanted to drop that. And I remember thinking, this is a bad idea, you know, why are they getting away from this? On the other hand, you see their campaign about trusting RTE, the truth matters. You know, this was an attempt to discredit non-mainstream media, you know, and it was ironic. They say sometimes, you know, if you're doing something wrong, you know, sort of say that you're doing the right thing, even draw attention to it, you know, and people will believe, well, you couldn't be that brazen, you know, to draw attention to the thing that you're doing wrong.
Do you think, do you have a sense, I've seen some numbers, I'm not sure if this is true, but you sense that the people who have most faith in RTE are a little bit like the people who have the most faith in the traditional print media? They tend to be older people. And ironically, precisely the people whose cultural values RTE is least likely to respect are the people most likely to actually have a higher degree of trust in the institution.
That makes sense at one level, in that they would have learned to trust maybe RTE at a time when RTE was more trustworthy, and things have changed very quickly, and it's easy to get caught out and not realize that the world has changed and is changing very quickly. I mean, it's quite difficult to write a story about anything at the moment because everything is changing so quickly. You know, we'd like to present the media landscape, but the rules of the game keep changing, partly because those with the same ideology, basically the same ideology, have such control at the moment that they can change things very quickly.
So can we just, maybe you've been personally in the organization before you joined the organization, has been monitoring bias in the organization, in certain areas. Can you talk a little bit more about the kinds of bias that you see or that you have seen? You can give maybe some examples that you can think of.
Yes. Yeah. Let's see. There's so many, and I could go through about 20 and leave 20 out. It's like that. But let's just say one, maybe the less obvious ones. This idea: don't scare the horses. You know, don't frighten the horses. Something important comes up, something really significant, and it just doesn't get reported at all, or maybe it gets mentioned briefly. I remember being contacted by, I won't mention their name here just in case they don't want, but a significant contributor to the media in Ireland at the time that the civil partnership legislation was being brought in, right? Now, this person would have expected to have been contacted for an interview, and they weren't. And they said, look, can you, you know, are you monitoring this? What's going on? I don't understand. And sure enough, there didn't appear to be anything at all about this. The heads of the bill were being brought in on civil partnership, nothing at all really on RTE drive time. And then even on the 6 o'clock news, nothing, you know, until a little bit later on, where it was presented as a debate between those people who wanted civil partnership and those people who wanted more than civil partnership. So the people who didn't want it at all weren't represented. It was just sort of a throwaway remark later on. So by doing that, you felt this can't be that important. It would be all over the news. This was important. Yes. And also they were redefining the middle ground, which is another favorite trick. The middle ground between, you know, it's like a middle ground between a lot of abortion and a little abortion, you know, where, you know, no abortion isn't in there, or the middle ground in that case between civil partnership and gay marriage. But no question of, you know, is this a good thing to be supporting in law? so those are two.
So
And another way. Yeah, sorry, yes.
Sorry, just on the face of just those two examples, and this would be maybe a wider issue. There's you I'm sure are aware, but for the sake of the watchers, there's a phrase which is very widely used in political and psychology and things like called the Overton window.
Mm-hmm.
And the Overton window is that what it's considered the space of respectable discussion. That the things that, and if you can move the Overton window to the left or the right, you effectively move how the discussion is happening. So what RTE do by covering and not covering, or by the way they frame the discussion, they create their own window of where the discussion is going to be held. So if you have it, well, we have either this much or we should have much more of this, then it's almost, the message is, well, obviously we don't have any discussion. It is accepted. It is just a truth that
it's not important. You know, it's not a big deal. That's a big issue. Yeah. I brought that up actually. I don't know if you probably do remember the Gosnell movie. People may be familiar with it. Yes, man. Now that became an issue in the United States because of the court case. You know, journalists weren't present covering it. You know, and yet this was really a big story. And RTE wasn't covering it. I did several screenshots. I did search RTE Gosnell. And it just, sorry, there are no results to match your search criteria. And the Photoshop or whatever, you know, and yes, so that I had a record to show that they weren't covering it. So then I brought this up just on Twitter with an RTE, I think, to Kevin Backhurst. I think he was the head of news, and he responded and said, "Oh, here we have it on the news." And sure enough, it was on the 9 o'clock news. They covered it once on the 9 o'clock news, but there was no follow-up coverage. If it was an anti-church story, Joe Duffy would probably have been running it for weeks afterwards. So this sort of died from lack of oxygen, you know. Reporting something insufficiently once or twice and not following up is almost as bad, sometimes worse, than ignoring it completely. Because you can always say, oh, no, we did cover it. It's a little bit like the newspaper equivalent is taking a very important story and putting it at the bottom of page 17, you know, the little column, and taking something unimportant, putting
I don't know if you remember.
So that would be.
I don't know if you remember if it was something that came across your purview, whatever it is, 5 years ago when the gender self-ID legislation was going through the door. It struck myself and some others who were commenting on it at the time that there was a remarkable lack for something which seemed, on the face of it, to be quite a wide-ranging piece of legislation, a remarkable lack of discussion about it. But that may have been a policy, both of the advocates of the legislation and
you see, after a while, then it's not just possible, but they change society to the extent that it actually can reflect the way a lot of people are thinking, and certainly the political situation. Talk about the media and political establishments. I think, I'm not sure who used the expression first. Possibly Breed O'Brien talked about the media and politicians, I think, marching in lockstep on an issue that, you know, where there is no genuine debate, and just actually it sort of brings in your idea there about sort of allowing a certain amount of discussion about something and then kind of holding it in. It's very interesting to go back. I did a research on this once before a talk I had to give. You go back even to World War II, you go back to Goebbels. He has some amazingly revealing things to say. I'll just give you one here. You may see the relevance. He said, the smart way to keep people, sorry, I've just lost it. Yeah. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum, even encouraging the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate. Actually, that one was Noam Chomsky, much more recent. Goebbels says something similar. I'll fish that one out too. But yes, exactly. And people think that they're getting they're getting great debate, they're getting great diversity. That, yeah, the Goebbels quote was much briefer. A media system wants ostensible diversity that conceals an actual uniformity. Interesting, the word diversity is used there because that's just the way you know, we understand diversity these days. It doesn't mean real diversity. We made a submission to the then Broadcasting Commission of Ireland. It was back again in the 2006 or thereabouts, and they were starting to talk about diversity. And I remember we made the point, well, look, there's a lot of diversity between Muslim, Islam, Judaism, Christianity. It accounts for such a large proportion of the world, and yet it's all based on the idea of natural law, at least, moral absolutism, whereas their idea of diversity was to do with relativism and something very different. So they weren't really talking about diversity at all in the real sense.
So, this is maybe something that would be interesting, but it's something myself and a colleague covered some time ago, which we thought was curious. This is a question more about, again, I suppose, about transparency. It would be normal in certain, for example, in media reporting or in the law, that if you have signed up or you're involved with an organization which has a particular position, that you should at least tell the people that when you go on to make the arguments or to take the positions, particularly if your job is to write news. Now, RTE is very unusual as a public broadcaster in Europe that we could see. It has signed, there's a global agreement for media organizations regarding climate change, that certain kinds of stories should be reported, certain kinds of stories should not be reported, certain kinds of tone should be taken, and RTE have signed up to that. Now, to my knowledge, if we're talking about transparency, that's not something which is attached. When RTE do a story on climate or on climate change or extreme weather events or whatever, there doesn't seem to be any desire to inform the public, oh, by the way, we have signed up to this agreement which says that we will not actually allow airtime to people who disagree with this opinion or this analysis. And I'm not interested in getting in here the issue of climate change. That's not it's not that I'm sort of some kind of radical climate skeptic, but rather that there is an ethical responsibility, surely, particularly, and that we can see. It's almost unique as a public service broadcaster, public funded broadcaster, to have signed up to this kind of agreement. Do you think that kind of thing is problematic for them?
It's problematic, but it's multi-layered. You see, they sort of use the fact that they have signed up as a way to virtue signal. It's almost like, look, we're actually being good because we're not allowing you to talk about it, because we're not hearing. That just shows what brilliant broadcasters we are, and they're trying to sell that idea. I mean, I remember it's an idea we brought up about, you see, things haven't changed. Like going back a few years now, 2016, the Broadcasting Commission, then the Broadcasting Authority, they have program codes. They've also got an advertising code. And we were suggesting, if they applied the advertising code effectively to program making, where you looked at what was being advertised as ideology, right? It would be far more effective, right? So the advertising code is actually very good in sort of spotting the sorts of biases, subtle biases that you can get in advertising. They're being used against us all the time, on things like life debates, but they don't apply because the program code is far looser, and the program maker can usually hide behind, editorial independence, and say, well, look, we're allowed to look at it really from whatever perspective we can, if we want to, And that's used to sort of cover up a great number of iniquities.
You mentioned a number of times the life debate. I remember a colleague of mine doing a bit of an post-fact analysis of the print media here. And they looked just at not opinion pieces, but news stories. And they found that upwards of 90% of news stories were a positive,
remember that,
or a repeal positive. And like, it was a terrific imbalance. Now, two things about RTE. A lot of people say that RTE were better than that. They were more balanced. First, I'd like your opinion on just if you have data on their balance. But secondly, one thing that's and we talked about at the time, but that it struck me was that there was a dishonesty when they talked about this, because one said, okay, you had the obvious news programs, the current affairs programs, the debates, but then you'll be listening to some program about. I'm giving this as a silly example, but I can remember something not that far away from this, listening on the radio, and somebody was talking about going, we'll say, on a walking holiday in the Pyrenees. Saying, yes, I went for this wonderful walking holiday, and I was coming down, and I was on my way to the airport, and I suddenly thought, isn't it awful how many Irish women have to get on an aeroplane to travel to England in order to access healthcare? And this was this kind of thing.
Exactly.
Where they were like currents dotted into programs which were nothing to do with current affairs, and therefore maybe didn't fall under the purview, we could say, of the rules for fairness and reporting and stuff. But it was like yeast throughout the whole of the loaf, and you couldn't escape it.
That's a very good analogy. I would say yes, that is a problem. It has been addressed to some extent. For example, we've put very complaints in to RTE, and others have as well, where RTE used that argument and said, well, you can't complain about that. This isn't really news and current affairs. This is just, the Ray D'Arcy show. We don't do that. But as we know, the Ray D'Arcy, and in fairness, I really struggle to say this, on occasion, not always by any means, not even most of the time, I would say, but the Broadcasting Authority did see it our way, right? And for example, Ray D'Arcy was hauled over the coals by the BAI. It's quite remarkable, 3 times for promoting abortion in relation to, now again, the use of language, fatal fetal abnormality, not non-medical term, so-called fatal fetal. And they issued a warning after the 3rd, program in a relatively short space of time that was biased. So the same sort of thing would happen with the Late Late Show. They would like to say, this is just entertainment, light entertainment, but no. So there's a certain amount of cover. And maybe if I can introduce sort of slightly curveball, sometimes the issue actually is in the other direction. Apart from, you can have the walking holidays in the Pyrenees where people promote abortion, but you can actually have news items, right, which are supposed to be absolute news items, but they introduce opinions and views. There would be maybe an interview with somebody, I remember coming up with the gay marriage referendum in particular, and who was promoting gay marriage essentially. And you couldn't complain about it because it was news, and news was fact. And we were actually prevented from complaining about it precisely because it was a news program, because it was assumed that what they were doing was wrong. It's almost like the argument, well, the Director General said it was this, therefore it must have been this. If they said this was the way it was, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but you should have been able to complain. So there are a lot of flaws in the codes in that sense, and the BAI, unfortunately, I would say, and also RTE, they're not slow to use legalistic loopholes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm conscious we've taken up quite a bit of your time, but before we finish up, 2 questions I'd like to sort of put together. There seems to be, at least from our perspective, a structural, a systemic, to use the language of the day, bias within the organization to such an extent that I think that sometimes when I talk to people who I'm friendly within the organization or connected to it, that they look at you and think, no, we're all these good people just doing their best. They're so inside a kind of a bubble that they actually don't really understand the extent to which people outside that bubble feel that they're just not getting a fair shake of the whip. So where
Yep.
did that come from? How did it happen that, how did we get where we are today, if you like, with the
Yes.
structure with RTE,
Okay,
first of all? And secondly, how do we get out of it? Or can we?
we can be talking about
do we just say,
groupthink,
let's go
relatively
elsewhere?
innocent groupthink. Yes, we can be talking about groupthink, and it can be a relatively innocent groupthink. You can have a conversation with somebody who you think is very well informed, maybe pro-life, and yet they just, because they're being used to being lied at so much, they don't actually see the forest for the trees. Again, Joseph Goebbels on this said, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it. And you will even come to believe it yourself. So if you were living in a sort of seat where, you know, good is evil, black is white, you know, you just incorporate it, I think, as into yourself as normal. So there are lots of good people working in RTE who just aren't aware really of what they're doing, you know, because they've been immersed. Now there are other people who are openly out and out ideological, you know, and no doubt will do anything to suppress the truth. And it actually makes it more difficult in a way, because there are good people. It's easier to sort of to put somebody forward, and sometimes this is done deliberately, to put somebody forward who you would think would be on the other side, somebody who seems to be an honest broker, who's actually arguing you know, the wrong case. I remember with gay marriage, again, often some people would be put on, say, who were quite old, who appeared to be conservative in order to bring along people like them. That was an old, and again, World War II trick. Karl Hovland, I think, did the research. He said, if you want to influence people to change their opinion, make them think that you're like them. Put somebody on who seems to be like you, and then they'll believe it, because, you know, one of your peers basically is telling you what to do. And RTE do that again and again. Could be down to an accent, a regional accent, anything.
So where do we go from here? I mean, is it a question that we just simply, shall we say, social conservatives or whatever, if you want to call it, people are not in the mainstream, just simply go and support other media platforms? We just abandon it, or is it salvageable? Can something be done to restructure it in a way that makes it fit for purpose?
Well, it's salvageable in a way. It's not written into the Constitution, you know, or at least we don't need a referendum. If the right people, if you like, are voted into power, it can be changed very, very easily. But it's the whole culture that needs to change. I encourage people to use other media sources to inform themselves, to use various Christian radio stations. You know, there are lots of them now. And at one stage, in fact, that's a cause for hope. You know, 20 years ago, the Minister for Communications at the time said, look, the idea of Christian broadcasting or radio has been abandoned. And now we have how many, you know? So no, we do what we can. We try to inform people and encourage people to use other sources. And I mean, list, I could have gone on with about 30 ways that the facts are misrepresented, you know, that the truth isn't spoken. And try to, it's really an awful lot of what we do, try to make people, educate people, make people more aware of how they are being lied to, how they are being influenced away from reality, really. And
if someone, one of
I think that is very important. There is a sense.
Sorry, if there's one of the listeners here who sees something on RTE, or hears something on RTE and feels that it is unfair or untrue or unbalanced, what's the best way for them to register that complaint? What should they do?
Well, now you go to Commission the Media Commission. They will say, in the first instance, contact the broadcaster themselves. put the complaint in, and then if they don't get back to you within 14 days, I think it is, then you take it on to commission them on. That's one way of going about. But I mean, you may get lucky. You know, they may take it up. Other than that, inform other people as well. Use social media, use text, get in touch with us, get in touch, you know, sort of bring it out there, bring it out into the light, you know. But I mean, sometimes there's lip service sort of paid towards these things. We put in, must have been around 20 complaints in the space of a few months, a few years ago. And the various broadcasters that we complained to, I think 95% didn't get back to us within the time frame, which they're required to do, you know. And then we had to bring it on. Sometimes we'll find that the broadcasting authority will say, "Oh yes, you were right," you know, and RTE or whoever, they were wrong, but we're still not going to uphold your complaint because we don't, you know, it's nonsensical, you know. But that is literally what we were told on one occasion. I think the excuse was that the person who was the main victim of the inaccuracy hadn't made a complaint themselves in that case. So
if people want to contact you, that is the Family Media Association,
yes.
Do you have a website where they can contact
yes,
you?
I just, yeah, info@fma.ie. You can email us there. It's fma.ie for Family and Media Association.
Family Media, and if they do Google that, or maybe Adrian will
and we put
up the website link there. And
things out, faithandmedia.net for monitoring as well, and fma.ie/watchman. Yeah.
Excellent. So listen, Donal, thank you for today.
Not at all.
I have a suspicion that we may be back to talk to you about, but this is not an issue that's going to go away.
No, and there's so much to be said, because you know the wool has been pulled over people's eyes, really, you know, in so many different ways. And once one awakens to the possibility that one is being lied to, you know, still needs to dig deeper and find out how, you know, because there are all sorts of ways really that we're being misled.
Well, so for the time being anyway, I'd like to thank Donal O'Sullivan. I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. Again, I'd remind you, hit on that subscribe button, and anything that you can give on the donate button, we can promise you we will do our best to use it to defend those life values that we all share. But for tonight, thank you and be well.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.